Welcome to the Inside Silverstone podcast, a business-focused podcast covering all things tech, engineering and innovation. Hosted by me, Chris Broome, a huge tech, motorsport and gaming fan, and also the owner of Longhurst, a firm of lifestyle financial planners and independent financial advisors located in Silverstone, Northamptonshire. This is a series of unscripted and unpolished conversations with leading business owners, thought leaders and high-tech talent where we discuss their experiences within the Silverstone business and motorsport region. We will also be asking them to share their knowledge, insight and their thoughts on the future just for you. If you're looking to learn more about the Silverstone high growth region and commercially connect with like-minded peers, you've definitely come to the right place. Welcome to Inside Silverstone. Welcome to the next edition of Inside Silverstone. My name is Chris Broome and I am your host. Today I am delighted to welcome to the show Caroline Robertson, who is the CEO of ActifHR. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Caroline, as is customary, as I always say at the beginning of every episode, I'd love to just do a quick career snapshot so we can let our wonderful listeners know sort of your journey from the beginning of your career to present day. So is it okay if I do that quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
So background basically is solicitor. So, you know, early on we're a solicitor for at a number of firms, a couple of firms, up until 2001. And so presumably involved in employment law very early on, and then in 2001 to present you set up employment law support, which you're still running today.
That's right, yes.
And then in 2015 set up presumably a second business to sort of run alongside it called ActifHR, which in itself is a member of the Silverstone Technology Cluster, as is my business Longhurst, and we're both based at the Innovation Centre. And so thus I said, let's get you on to gas bag about all things legal, HR and coronavirus, unfortunately.
Sure.
So let's talk about ActifHR. So for those that haven't met you yet, haven't heard of the business, introduce us. So what does the business do and why do you do it?
Yeah, so ActifHR, it provides HR and employment law support to a whole range of businesses, but we focus particularly on high performance, high tech businesses. A lot around the Silverstone zone, up to Northamptonshire, Milton Keynes. Very much it's important to us to have that personal relationship we build with the businesses. And I do actually love it when the business owner, which we get to know, I like to be on site. I don't want to have an HR service or employment law service that is detached, to be able to be on site. And I like that the manager or the finance department or the managing director just to pick up the phone and say, Caroline, I have really messed up. Which is great. I'd much rather have it and know what we're dealing with than trying to second guess. So we provide a whole sort of range of services, but I call it the 3 R's. I call it recruit, retain and release. Okay. So recruit, we're not recruitment consultants. We get involved with the whole sort of onboarding process. Not everybody knows what that is, but it's the interview support, how to bring on in induction, deal with training plans, look at all the contracts of employment, handbooks and policies you might need. So that's getting a good start. And I actually find 1 in 7 employees don't make it through probation because they don't either feel that the company has been professional or welcomed them on properly, or they are of the view that it's not quite the right place for them, or the company doesn't think that they're right for them. And it's often because their early start days, I call it the first 90 days, are really important. And then we have retain, which is all about managing our employees, dealing with performance, sickness, all those questions, disciplinaries, investigations, and then the release side, which unfortunately is the negotiations to terminate their employment quite often.
Sure. And how do you actually help with each of those 3 R's? So can you go into their office to support them? Is it just external and you send them documents? You know, do you actually meet the employees and you're part of that onboarding process? How does it actually work in real terms?
Yeah, well, that's what I really enjoy about being an HR employment law consultant now as a non-practicing solicitor, rather than being on the solicitor side, because I love being on site. I love going and meeting the companies and getting to know, and you get to know the employees. Unfortunately, when you do come in, they think you are the Grim Reaper occasionally, bringing my side, which unfortunately has to happen.
Yeah.
The difficulty is quite often the managing directors find it quite difficult maybe having those tricky conversations because they've built up a friendly team, and it's very difficult then to have those difficult conversations. So it is very useful having a third party that can come in, have a bit more of a impartial view, try and talk to both sides, and the most important thing is trying to resolve the difficulties, because they've spent a lot of money recruiting and training that person, and you don't want to lose that person in circumstances where we don't need to. So it's very much, of course, I have a lot of email, telephone support to clients where they can just pick up the phone and I'll draft letters, documents, whichever they need. So the good thing is, by having the solicitor training, I can turn my hand to a whole range of employment law, HR, and almost sort of employment litigation type documents if I need to. But we don't want to be there. We really, my view is, if we end up heading towards a tribunal, we've done something wrong, because if we can get it right, the process through that process, that's the most important thing for me.
Okay, you pretty much answered my next question, because I was going to ask, why would a company look to, employ the services of a business like yours, as opposed to potentially sort of trying to do a DIY job in-house and take care of it themselves? And so presumably part of the answer to that is because you can do a lot of the heavy lifting for them. There's obviously impartiality. They may be emotionally connected to this employee because of the number of years building up a relationship and potentially friendship. What are some bad examples, if there are any, or that you have, of people not engaging with a service like yours and instead trying to do it themselves? Do you have such examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, occasionally we get a call from a business that says, look, we're at ACAS already. ACAS is the Advisory Conciliation Service for the government to mediate if they end up looking to head towards a tribunal. And they'll have a call from an ACAS conciliation officer saying, this employee is wanting this. And when we've got to that, we shouldn't be at that point without having that policies and those procedures in place. Occasionally it goes to a tribunal, and I don't think the business owner, they often think about the cost involved, and that cost is really important of how much it costs to defend a claim, but they have no idea about the management time and the stress involved. It just overwhelms other managers who are dealing with it when you're at that cutting edge of going to a tribunal. The weird thing is, for me now, because I'm on site a lot, and I quite often will maybe assist a company with chairing a very tricky appeal process or a tricky disciplinary, or help with investigations, I've ended up being a witness, which is really interesting.
Wow.
That before I would go into a tribunal as the rep, now I occasionally, very rarely, because we shouldn't be there, have been in a few times as a witness on the stand, which is actually quite a very strange position to be in. And that's good for me, because you can see how much time and how stressful and just the whole process, how ugly it gets. So we really don't want to be there. And my view is that if we have a well-managed company where we are not always fighting fires, what I say to my clients is, just pick up the phone before you do it. Just pick up the phone, or send me an email. Just before you say it, just pick up the phone. And then if we can sort that problem out, just in terms of team spirit, the way that people will then want to stay with the business longer because they can see it's well managed, rather than we're always fighting fires. And I had a great situation recently where a company rang me and they said, well, we've got ACAS on the phone because we're heading towards it's an unfair redundancy dismissal situation. And he'd got so frustrated, he couldn't get hold of the person eventually to start the at-risk consultation for redundancy. And he'd rung and he just didn't know what to do. And he'd left a message on the answer phone to say, you've been sacked for redundancy. And I'm like, he said, Caroline, you've got to sort it out. So, why are we at that situation? Why have we got to that point? So hopefully by engaging with a company like ours, we can help you, lead you by the hand at a much more cost-effective, less stressful process.
Sure, and that's obviously the the sort of back end, the worst back end, i.e. the release, the bit where potentially there's contention. But at the front end with recruitment, how do you, let's pretend I engage with your service. So Longhurst was looking to recruit, you know, operations manager, for example, which we are going to be doing this year. How could you help my business with that recruitment process? You know, are you part of the interviews? Do you help me with writing job specs? Do you coach me on questions to ask and things to look out for? How would I benefit by engaging with that?
Yeah, I've actually been doing some great training on how to, at high level roles usually is the most effective to bring someone like me in, on how to spot an exaggerator at an interview. And I've been really surprised over the years. We've had some companies where that employee is just not what they said they thought they could deliver at that level, even looking at their CVs on how much they may have been exaggerated. I know a lot of companies do checks afterwards when they bring somebody in, perhaps to check their references quite detailed way. But I've been doing some training and sitting in on high level interviews on how some really interesting tips on how you can spot somebody who perhaps is exaggerating their abilities or exaggerating how strong a lead they took on a project, which has been, and so the best tip I can give you actually, which anyone can walk away with right now, is when you do a high level interview, always have a break halfway through. Always have a 10-minute break where you get somebody else to walk that person through your workplace and be relaxed about introducing them to other people within the workplace. Because that is the time when you, if it's yourself and somebody else on that interview, can compare notes, because there are often questions that are unresolved and one person will be going, but he didn't give me enough detail on this. And you will have that conversation where you can tease out things that didn't sit quite right and never feel frightened about asking them again to explain something about what their role was or what they did. So it's quite helpful when you have an HR person sat in a high level interview, because they are able to listen, and I'm listening to all the various different prompts and languages. So in that 10-minute break, I can then say, have you thought about this? How should we ought to answer these sorts of questions? So we do a lot, we get involved in that. And then I often get involved in particularly higher level of those induction process, because I like to explain a contract. I like to explain policies. And what's the most important thing for me is explaining the ethos of a firm. Lots of people forget that. They just get someone started and they don't explain, what are we about? What's our ethos? What's our mission statement? How do we deal with our clients? How do we deal with a situation like this if it arises, and interaction with our team members? And for me, that's really important, because it sets somebody up to think, this is the zone I'm in to work with this business, and just gets them flying and makes them feel really valued, and that helps with their retention.
Yeah, certainly at interview stage would want to ensure that they understood, certainly from Longhurst's perspective, our core values, because they're quite different compared to most financial firms. And so I would really need to make sure that from a human level that they really engaged with them, because if they didn't, then that would have to be a non-starter. So yeah, totally endorse that. So one of the reasons I asked you to come on, there's many reasons I asked you to come on, was that last week, so we're now on what's the date today? The 9th of April 2020. So last week I listened to a fantastic webinar that you hosted talking about, clearly, coronavirus and the job retention scheme and the government support. And so I want you, if it's okay, just to really just explain a little bit more to those listening to this who might just want some further information, you know, what's currently available. I think there was an update on the weekend, so what's that update, and sort of what's going on. So I'll sort of pass it across to you, Caroline, and let you sort of talk and gas bag as much as you want.
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure. So the biggest questions I've been having are about the coronavirus job retention scheme. That's been the thing that has been a great, unprecedented scheme that's been put in by the government. And as most of us all know, that allows a business to claim 80% of an employee's salary when they're put on what we call furlough leave. Furlough leave is a weird term. We've never heard it before. It has no basis in employment law as such. It's just a term they've chosen. They could have chosen laid off leave.
It's been made up, hasn't it? It's literally just been created.
Laid off, yeah. And it allows a employee to be able to be on this furlough leave for hopefully a minimum period of 3 months. We hope, if it maybe the government extends it, but we don't have any clarity on that. But it is capped at a monthly cap of 2,500 a month, and that's gross, so they can take away deductions of tax and NI from that. So why do we have to have, what I'm saying is we're asking businesses to sign these furlough leave agreements, and I know lots of businesses have asked employees to sign them. Lots of employees have also been asked to sign them when they go on furlough leave, and people are saying, well, why do we need them? The reason being is that in our employment contracts, often in the 1970s in manufacturing, we had a statutory layoff clause that allowed businesses to lay people off. And that's a bit of a hangover from the olden days. A lot of contracts still have those layoff clauses in. Today, one of our many professional office type contracts don't have them. So if we just laid off our employees, potentially without an agreement, we are still liable for their 100% salary, and it would be a potential breach of contract just laying them off without their agreement. So that's why we're asking to sign these furlough leave agreement letters, and they are hopefully relatively straightforward. What has been really interesting over the time is when the scheme was announced, we had scant guidelines that went with it, and we've been having every so often some guidelines have been published which have helped give us some clarity. Bizarrely, overnight on Saturday, which was the 4th of April, HMRC published some other guidance, some more up-to-date guidance. Don't know what they were doing overnight at that point, but probably building the online portal. I have just heard this morning the online portal will be up and running and launching on the 20th of April. So that's just hot off the press, which is later than we had hoped. We'd hoped it would happen earlier so that it would make the applications would make the April payroll. HMRC is not going to be paying out this money for the April payroll. So the difficulty with businesses laying employees off at the moment on furlough leave is, of course, they have to make the April payroll, and they're not going to get HMRC payments back until May. So that is a problem in terms of cash flow, and a lot of businesses I know are struggling with that. What has been interesting with the clarity on this coming from the guidance was there was a whole discussion on, if you put your employees on furlough leave, can they do any work, or can they work for somebody else? We do know, and that's always been clear, is if they go on furlough leave, they can't do any work for the business. They can do training, and lots of businesses are saying, well, can I get them to do training, and then they could do a little bit of work on the side that looks like training? And it's absolutely no, they are laid off. They can do training. So I say to companies, if they are doing training, you're better to put training in the subject heading, so it's clear they open the training emails, and that they don't get involved in responding to clients. They probably need to set up a auto response email to say, look, I'm on furlough leave, please contact such and such. So we're clear about that. But what we weren't clear about is, can an employee start a new job? So there was always the thought they can't start a new job while they're on furlough leave because they can't get the benefit of the scheme and then go and get another job. Bizarrely, it has just been clarified that they can start a new job while they're on furlough leave.
Wow.
So they could earn 80% of the old salary and 100% of a new one. And all of us are very surprised by that, because we thought the idea of furlough leave was to keep people at home and have money to have bread on the table and not go out and work. So the only reason we sort of can think that the government has allowed that is because there are jobs out there that are essential that need filling, like going and working for the NHS as porters, catering for the NHS, and there are vacancies for that. Food delivery, supermarkets are recruiting, and delivery companies and all of those things. So we think possibly why the government's allowed that is to keep, strawberries are going to rot in the fields, beans are going to need picking, to allow people to keep the essential services, the economy going on those job fronts. So that's been really interesting. Some companies are just saying to their employees, while you're on furlough leave, your contract says you can't work for anybody else. So we're enforcing that, and you can't, which is a fair, absolutely fair.
Yeah.
So what we've also been interesting has come through is that initially the guidance said when they're on furlough leave, they couldn't claim commission and bonuses. It was basic salary. And it's just come through that HMRC says that they can claim 2,500 max, can claim commission and bonuses, can be part of it to make it up. A company has no obligation to top up the 80% to the 100%. Some companies are, some companies aren't. So it's been kind of interesting what's come through. There's still not any guidance on exactly what's happening with holiday pay and holiday leave. There's two schools of thought on it, and my view is that we should be asking our employees while they're on furlough leave to draw down their holiday.
Yeah.
Whether it's just the 2 days a month or whatever. Some companies are saying you have to take 10 days in 3 months, because what we don't want is an employees coming back in July and all having their full holiday entitlement.
Yeah, it'd be a disaster. Yeah, absolutely.
Because operationally, that's when we're full on.
Yeah.
So those have been the really interesting things that have come through. What I would say, get your businesses prepared, ready for the 20th of April launch date, because HMRC has been scrabbling around building this portal from scratch. It's going to crash. The whole country is going to be applying on the 20th of April.
Yeah.
Apparently HMRC is writing to businesses to tell them what to do. So look out for this letter. But we know the whole thing's going to crash. So I'd say get yourself ready by getting your finances on the furlough stuff, in the financials ready. Get your payroll sorted so identify exactly what the reclaimed value of the 80% is. And you've got all that detailed as a separate spreadsheet so you know what to input when that date comes, and your payroll can do it, or your accountants, to calculate. So with people that are on earnings that are sporadic, that are casual earners, or we felt initially that 0 hours casual earners might not be able to be on this furlough scheme. They can. The key thing now is as long as they're on the payroll on PAYE as of the 28th of February, they are entitled. But if they've got erratic earnings, we calculate that by looking at the last 12 months in the tax year and what the average was of that, or the higher of what were they earning exactly the same a year ago. So whichever is the best for them, we can use that as our earning figure to put in. So get yourself ready, because then you would be great as a business to get your application in first thing that the portal opens on the 20th of April.
How does furloughing work for limited company sort of sole directors? So one or two man sort of bands, as it were, small businesses, as it were, but they're limited companies, so they pay themselves PAYE plus dividends if there's profits. How does that work with furloughing?
Yeah, and unfortunately, directors are the ones that are falling through the gaps, because we know we've got the self-employed scheme that is up and running, very similar to the furlough scheme for self-employed people, except weirdly, which is good, self-employed people are allowed to work during that time. But for company directors, they seem to be the ones falling through the gaps, in that if they are on PAYE, they can furlough themselves, but they can't include their dividends. And the trouble is, a lot of company directors will only pay themselves the minimum basic salary and take the rest in dividends. So they are the ones that are going to fall through the gaps of not having the benefit of the scheme as such, apart from just what they have on PAYE.
Okay. Anything else to sort of add to sort of coronavirus support? Anything else that's pertinent today?
What I would say is that, and this is just from an HR point of view, it's very isolating working from home, as all of you probably know. It's going to be we don't know how long it will go on for. I'm having some employees that are finding it really hard to motivate themselves, to feel engaged. They've got children running around in the background at home, and they're trying to hold down a job. And so I do ask employers, try and be as flexible as they can. Some employees are having to work in the evenings or late in the day because their juggling kids as well, young
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
But also do things, and I think these Zoom meetings are great about engaging and keeping some kind of team spirit. And I think it's a great idea to do a daily quiz, actually. Do whatever you want. Bingo. I'm finding the quizzes are going really well. And have at 12 o'clock, 10 question quiz where each employee takes it in turn. It could be just in their team, a particular topic, and they, could be on 1980s rock bands. Or it could be loads of geeky questions. I've got some companies that are doing geeky questions, or, if you're in motorsport, who won Le Mans for the last 20 years, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people are finding that a lot of fun because they're missing the social interaction with their colleagues.
Yeah, human to human.
It's all very well setting up Zoom meetings to chat about work, but do Zoom meetings or whatever platform you use to actually have a bit of fun together, because those are the things that at the end of this period, you will be remembered as an employer that really does care about your employees and wants to ensure that from a mental point of view, they're so ready to come back because they are up to date with all the changes, what's been going on, as well as have had a bit of fun together.
Yeah, I think it's critically important. Silverstone Technology Cluster. So we're both members of the STC, and we both live locally, as we sort of discussed before recording started. But before the STC, there was, or still may be, the Silverstone Business Forum, which you were our chair of. So what was that? And then how did that sort of help shape what we now know as the STC?
Well, Silverstone Business Forum doesn't operate anymore, but it was basically I set up a networking organisation at Silverstone Park about 6 years ago when I started working at Silverstone Park, thinking there is no actual professional networking organisation, or I know there was social events going on, and I'm conscious that a lot of the companies up there are kind of go up there, come home, don't necessarily network with people at the park apart from the odd MEPC event. So it was a team of myself with about 3 or 4 other professionals, and I contacted Silverstone UTC, which is it's effectively a engineering school, I'd say, at the circuit. It's different from the motorsport college. It's based in the heart of the circuit, and it's a great, fabulous facility. And so we based it out of there. Neil Patterson, the headmaster, very kindly let us use that, and he came along to quite a lot of the events, and it was a once a month networking meeting. And Pim van Barsen joined in after about 8 months and came on the steering group. And because of all his connections with motorsport and automotive, we had a speaker once a month and just relaxed networking. And it was a great way for people to sort of meet different contacts. I've met a lot of contacts up there, and it was great having Pim on board. And from there, Rosberg came a few times. And the idea, I think, about a networking group, a membership group, sort of talked about, discussed. I went with Pim and Ros a few times to meet a few other membership networking organisations to see how they ran it. And the fantastic thing was that from that, Ros and Pim worked so hard to put Silverstone Technology Cluster together as a proper formal networking organisation and a support to all those businesses with the events that they run and special interest groups. So it was just, a great thing to come to see born, Silverstone Technology Cluster.
Yeah, 2.5, 3 years later, it's growing, 115 plus members at the moment, which is clearly fantastic. So just quickly, before we get on to some of the last questions, so coming back to the sort of job retention scheme, so you're talking about an additional document to support a contract of employment. So presumably this is a document that you have that if businesses are watching or listening to this, they're thinking, okay, well, we need something else to sort of make this watertight. You've got a service and a document and can provide advice on sort of putting that in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working with the barrister for the last 3 weeks, fine-tuning a furlough leave agreement, which is a 2-page, easy to read in plain English, but it covers all the areas that I think could be risk areas, and I've got some various different options clients can put in or not. So my view is that it's really important to get that in place, get that signed. I've seen some going out there that are a bit horrific, actually. So, hopefully businesses might make use of that service. I also have had a few companies who've said their employees, interestingly, have been challenged in the workplace. Maybe they're dealing with a warehousing or workshop situation where the police have just done an on-spec call to check, which I've been surprised by. But I think if this goes on, depending on how it ends up, we may have more of those spot checks. So I would advise a company to have a letterhead from the managing director or director to say you're an essential key, not a key worker, because we know the definition of those as national health and food delivery, etc. But you're an essential service, and those are the people that are helping keep delivery of certain goods going, and finance, IT support, senior management. A lot of those roles in the workplace are needed. So I would advise to have a letter, which we can draft as well, on letterhead in someone's back pocket, just in case they ever need that. So we do have a range of things, as well as I can help with advice if we need to continue to send email bulletins out to employees just to keep them updated or where we're at.
Okay, good.
All those sorts of things. Absolutely.
People listening to this and watching this, take heed. Do not do a DIY job on this. It's too important. So engage with Caroline, and she'll be more than happy to support you. And so what we'll do, Caroline, in the show notes for both iTunes and Spotify and what have you, plus YouTube, we'll put some of your details and links. So if you can give me some links for contact and for websites, etc., I'll make sure people can find you.
Great, thank you.
Before we go on to the last two questions, because we've been rocking and rolling for 31 minutes. I told you it'd go quickly. So before we get on to the last two questions, which are the same two questions for every interview we've ever done, is there anything I haven't asked you that whilst we've got you on and you're on air that you want to cover off? Anything else that I've missed?
I don't think so, really. I think and as we all know, it's very difficult choosing a service provider, and not every service provider will be right for the company. I'm never insulted if someone, it's a fit, isn't it? It's about trust. And for me, I think what's been really important for me is learning about building relationships. That's key, isn't it? And it's making sure that we really understand each other and understand those relationships and how the business works. And whichever service provider you find, that's, for me, I've learned that over the years, that is such an important thing, because I want a client to be able to ring and say, I've done this. And I immediately say to myself, I know why you've done that, because I know the kind of how you tick. It makes absolute sense. And I know what you're going to do next. So before you do what you're going to do next, can we just have a discussion about the options? I also think that when you're giving advice, it has to be practical and commercial, because it's all very well spouting a party line. If you don't do this, you'll end up in litigation. Or if you do this, this could be, I need to be able to take you through the risks and give you options as a business, not just cut you on a very tight route, because you need to be able to assess those risks and options. And sometimes we choose a course of action which is a bit more risky, but commercially it's better for the business, because the business just needs to crack on and get on with it and not be dragged down with a whole long process. So I think that's really important, about let's be practical as well.
Totally agree. Very good. Thank you. Last two questions. So second from last question is embarrassing mistakes. So we love to share embarrassing stories and funny sort of anecdotes. So is there anything in your career and your background that you'd be prepared to share with our wonderful listeners?
Probably one that made me laugh was I was a solicitor in Manchester, and everyone does this. When you put it into the email line at the top, a name, and somebody else's name comes up and you don't check it. I learned from there never to do that again. So I put in there to my friend, and I put in Angela. Somehow, I don't know why it came up with Andrew. I have absolutely no idea. Anyway, so I put in about Angela, and I just said, look, I'll meet you under the clock tower in Manchester, whatever, at 8 o'clock. Haven't seen you for ages, you know, whatever. It was a very short email. I'll be one with a red rose or something along those lines. And it fired off to a solicitor. I was actually having a case at the other side of a case in Leeds.
Oh no! Oh no!
And he had no idea that it wasn't for Angela, because it was just, I'll meet you under the clock tower at 8
Oh my
o'clock.
God!
And I got this email back to say, hi, Caroline. He said, that would be nice, but I've actually got something on this week, and can we do next week? And I'm just thinking, I'm married. This isn't going well.
Oh my God!
How do I get out of this one?
Oh my God! How did he react when you obviously owned up?
I just had to fess up, and I said, I'm so sorry, but that was for a mate of mine, you know, Angela. I'm really sorry,
Well,
you know. And of course, then he felt a real idiot, just having taken that, as if you would send an email like that. I mean, honestly.
I think he'll be more embarrassed than you, definitely.
Probably. So that it did make me laugh all day.
That's a great story. I think that's definitely in the top 10 we've had.
Oh, great.
We've had a lot, so that's the top one. Very, very good.
So I would urge from that, be very careful with the outlook on who you send the email to, because it's very easy. You know?
Very, very easy to cock it up. Last question, bit of life advice. I mean, to be honest, you've just given a great bit of life advice, but we know we have students listening to this because we've had Mr. Patterson on from the UTC, so we know hopefully some of the students there are listening to this. We've also had Kingsthorpe College in Northampton, where we've interviewed a bunch of the students listening to this, and so we always want to make sure that we give on some life advice to the sort of next generation. So you've clearly had a very, very successful career and continue to do so, but if you take yourself back to a 20-year-old version of Caroline, for example, what one bit of life advice would you give yourself now that you know what you know?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say when I started out in my career, I probably didn't have any plan on marketing. I just went to every networking I could come up with, and you just spread yourself too thin without a plan on, is this effective? Is this an effective use of my time? Am I making the right contacts? Because just a scattergun approach of firing business development out there and picking up a range of business cards does not mean you bring in business, does it?
No.
And it took me a while. And even though I built relationships with people, they were not the right fit. They weren't the right service providers for me. And you learn who are going to be kind of your referral partners, or who to build those relationships with, where to spend your time marketing or on business development. So I've learned when people ring me to say, do you want to do X, Y, and Z, or join X, Y, and Z? I've just learned to think, well, this is my target. This is where I want to grow the business. These are the kind of businesses I want to work with. And if you're not in that, I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to get dragged into spreading myself too thinly on all of those things. So that's probably the most useful life lesson I had when I was starting my business at the beginning, because I got distracted all over the place.
I mean, that's sage advice. It's fantastic advice. Very, very easy to go to networking events when you're in your 20s, right? And just fly out hundreds of business cards, and you get hundreds of business cards back, and then before you know it, you've got a desk full of them, and you're then supposed to follow up with emails, and it just becomes just a complete waste of time, right? So and some people still do that and haven't learned that lesson.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know a few of them. So great advice, Caroline. Thank you so much for coming on. As I've said, I'm going to put links to contact you and your website, etc., in the show notes. So for anybody listening or watching this, if they want to get in contact with Caroline and discuss job retention scheme, sort of documentation, and basically just advice to make sure that you don't verbally cock it up, politely said, Caroline is the lady to contact. So Caroline, thank you very much for coming on, and look forward to speaking to you again very, very soon.
Thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me on. I really enjoyed it, and speaking to you as well, and appreciate that opportunity.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Inside Silverstone podcast is produced by the team at Longhurst for the benefit of those with a passion for all things tech, engineering and innovation. For more information, please visit longhurst.co.uk/Inside Silverstone, whilst also remembering to give us a 5 out of 5 star rating on iTunes. Please note that neither Chris Broome or Longhurst work for Silverstone Park, Silverstone Circuit or Silverstone Technology Cluster.